Hello, everyone. Welcome to UCB-TV, your place to touch base with the community. Today, we have an installment of our candidate conversations, and we are joined by Boston City Council woman Michelle Wu, and she's also a mayoral candidate. Michelle, how are you doing today?
Good morning. Yeah, as I was saying earlier, today was a little hectic. We are counting down the days, not only until the preliminary election, but that's also when school starts. And so that'll be the first time in 6 years that both kids will get dropped off at the same place ever. And that will be life-changing for me.
Definitely. So I think you at UCB, we're a relational organization, right? Union Capital Boston. We share stories with each other in order to build trust and work together. So we'd like to hear your story. What makes you who you are, and why has it led you to run for mayor?
I'm someone who never ever expected that I would end up in politics. I'm the oldest kid to immigrant parents, and I'm honestly pretty introverted and shy in a lot of ways. My family also just was very suspicious of politics, very distrustful, I should say. And I didn't realize until later in my life it was because my immigrant parents who had come from Taiwan to the US themselves were children of immigrants, because both sets of my grandparents had fled civil war in mainland China. And so we were supposed to stay far away from all of the things that my family had been trying to get away from for multiple generations. And so the goal of my household was work hard, study hard, go to a good school, and then just support your family. Things got a little complicated when my mom was becoming a single mom, and she also experienced a mental health crisis. And so I found myself at age 22, all of a sudden having to just figure out how to put one foot in front of the other for the whole family. My two sisters were 10 and 16, and I basically raised them for the next decade. My mom was really, really struggling, and I owe everything to this city. And we found a way to bring my whole family over. My mom has gotten some of the best treatment in the world here in Boston. My sisters have graduated from the schools that I've been able to help raise them through, and I get to live in a two-family home today where I'm upstairs with my husband and two kids, and I get to send them downstairs to have breakfast with grandma, with my mom every day, because that's what's possible here. But I carry with me that feeling every day of what it means to stay up all night in the emergency room with my mom, waiting, praying, begging for a mental health bed to open up, or try to navigate such a complex school system to find the way to get to what works. I've now had a decade in City Hall trying to close these gaps, and I know how much is possible in Boston if we can just make sure that everyone is at the table and that we are really thinking about our future in a way that includes each one of us.
So in our current survey of Union Capital Boston members, a majority state that housing is their number one concern in this election, which is understandably the case for many Bostonians. Also of note, a majority of our members surveyed still don't know who they're voting for yet for mayor. So, and they've indicated that they are voting. So really good to know on your end and for all the candidates. Some members share that they're just getting by paying their rent, but if they ever want to own, they have to move out of the city. Other members share that they've seen increases in homelessness, and others are frustrated by what they see as continued high-end development that they can't afford. What is your number one kind of way to address the issue of housing, and how will you do it?
It's for the city to take responsibility. For a long time, we've kind of talked about housing as something that state government and federal government should be helping us out more with, but that is kind of out of our hands. And that's just not true. We have the power in city government to do more. I'm the only candidate in this race who has said, with this once in a generation chance at federal funds to help us recover, we can't split this into 1,000 different little things and put band-aids on deep challenges. I'm going to commit to making sure that more than $200 million of this funding, the foundation for our recovery, will go to housing stability and increasing home ownership. And so there's a couple of things that we need to do. First is to really use city dollars and build affordable housing directly. It's important to make sure that we are guiding, when developers in the private market are building, and to have a share of that to help support affordable housing. But we can do more ourselves and think about where there are city buildings where housing can go on top and make that affordable, green, energy efficient, and available as homeownership to our residents. The second is to really change the rules. It's a really complicated system now. Our zoning code is out of date. It doesn't reflect what affordability or transportation needs or climate needs our communities are facing. And so we need to get in there and change that zoning code, and especially to speed up the process for affordable housing that's proposed. And then we need to make sure that we are thinking innovatively about how we can increase homeownership. This is the reason why Boston has one of the biggest racial wealth gaps anywhere in the country, is disparities when it comes to how hard it is to buy a home and to have that security. And so I will make sure that we are increasing the support for down payment assistance and helping first time and first generation home buyers, as Boston has worked with so many community partners to do so. But we have to go beyond that. And I'm pushing to pilot a municipal home ownership voucher. So we're not just giving rental vouchers that help people, but sometimes it feels like you're spinning your wheels and you're at the mercy of the landlord of what they're going to charge you. Let's make sure more people can own their home. And then last, but really important as well, I am the only candidate in this race who supports rent control. Rent stabilization is really important. It's going to take, we will work our hardest to increase housing supply and to use all those things that I just talked about, but it'll still take years for new buildings to be built and for those units to become available. In the right here and now, right in this moment, families are getting displaced. The evictions moratorium just lifted at the federal level. We have to do every possible thing we can to keep families in their homes. And I'm proud to stand with the people and say we have to do more. And that includes fighting for city government to be able to help stop that displacement.
Sorry, I was on mute. So with rent control, how exactly would it work?
So we are as a city government, we're able to think about policies on all different issues, and we can pass laws, we can put specific zoning requirements, we can add funding programs to help support different things. But in this one area, this is a place where power has been taken away from city government through a statewide ballot initiative a couple decades ago that Boston voted against, but narrowly statewide passed. And so we've been unable at the city level to talk about how city governments can really provide protection and support. So we need to make sure that we are getting back that authority for city government to have the conversation, and then to use rent stabilization as one tool in the whole toolbox of what we're going to do to make sure that families are having more access to affordable units, home ownership, and also stabilized and not in fear of displacement.
And second to housing, a really close second for the survey of our Union Capital Boston members was education. And it's a concern for them in this election and for every election. Members are sharing frustrations about funding not being equitably distributed through schools, a lack of support for students with IEPs, a decline in support for music and art, and a lack of enough qualified teachers. They've also voiced concerns about inadequate vocational education. What will be your priority as mayor to address a lot of these, pretty multifaceted issues when it comes to the state of public education here in Boston?
This is incredibly personal for me. I keep saying, put a BPS mom in charge of the city and we will see some changes. I got a lot of skin in the game here. Not only am I personally someone whose life has been changed through public education. My family moved a couple times growing up because every time my dad's salary went up, they'd basically try to move into that next smallest house in the best possible public school district they could afford. And so I was always the kid with holes in my shoes, sitting in classrooms with classmates with a lot more resources, but I got to be in those spaces in art classes and music rooms and science labs. And so I know what's possible when we make those doors open for our kids. And I've now been involved as a parent and legal guardian in BPS for about a decade, raising my sisters through middle school and high school. And then now starting over, my two boys are 4 and 6, and they're both at the Sumner School in Roslindale in BPS. And so I've seen, right, as a city councilor, I've gone and visited every single Boston Public High School specifically to sit and learn from the school leaders and teachers and students and nurses at those schools. And we see how big the gaps are, that such amazing potential and resources in parts of our district, and in other parts, buildings that don't have doors on the bathrooms at work or safe, clean drinking water, much less what our kids deserve. So my school's plan is up on our website. Please check it out. It comes from just hours and hours of sitting with community and iterating and coming up with the most urgent ideas. There's 4 big pieces to it. 1, start earlier. We need to close the gap for early education and universal pre-K. We can do it at the city level. I've put out a plan, was the first candidate to really focus on this because both my kids were born after I joined the council. And as a working mom, sometimes pushing that big double stroller onto the T or trying to figure out how you can make everything work, we need to provide support. It has so much impact across everything in our city. Number 2 is really having a whole child, whole community approach. It's not enough just to say we're going to think about what our kids learn through math, science, language arts, and the curriculum. Anything that happens in our families' lives at home and in the community directly impacts what can happen in the classroom. And so we need to make sure we're connecting the whole range of city resources to our families. I proposed a children's cabinet to make sure we're coordinated on the city side and accountable, and then connecting every student the moment they enter BPS all the way through with a single point of contact who will help them with anything they need outside, anything that family needs outside the classroom. So young people come to school just ready, excited, healthy, happy, ready to learn. The third is facilities. As I mentioned, we need a whole lot of change here. There are many school districts across the country that have very old buildings, historic buildings, kind of the age of ours, but they still have air conditioning in them. They still have safe drinking water. They've been updated and maintained and renovated. We cannot let our young people be in spaces that don't reflect how much we value them. And so that's going to be a major push of mine. We have a whole plan for our Green New Deal for school buildings and how to make them healthy and work. And then last but not least, it's vocational education. Madison Park should be the best anywhere. I've spent a lot of time visiting with all the community members affiliated with Madison Park, going out to Worcester to study with their vocational technical high school. We have all the pieces. We just need to make sure that there's urgency to not just plan for the jobs of today and getting our young people in them, but really to work with our industry partners and think ahead 5, 10, 15, 50 years. What do the jobs of tomorrow look like? And how can Boston be prepared to close these gaps and get our community members right in there?
Thank you. How about for the exam schools? Recently there were votes taken on, the exam school criteria. Want to just get a sense of like what you think about the exam schools entry criteria testing into the 3 Boston exam schools: Boston Latin, Boston Latin School, Boston Latin Academy, and the John D. O'Brien.
Yeah, so I know the exam school system very well personally. As also my baby sister went through middle school and then into Boston Latin. And so I know what it means for families to get that opportunity. I know how much it feels like you're walking just this narrow tightrope sometimes to feel like you can access the places where there are resources and supports and all the stress that comes with the uncertainty of it too. And the real problem here is that no point in our district's lotteries, enrollment, or admissions processes should feel like a high stakes situation, right? Where if you don't get the letter that says the right thing, or if you didn't get the lottery number that is, really going to get you into the top 10 spots that are available, that you're kind of stuck. We need to make sure that every single seat across the district is high quality. I've spent time visiting every high school and we'll make sure that that is the focus. We also need equity in every part of our district. And so it's on us as a city to recognize when there are places where there were such big gaps between what our community looks like and the diversity that's represented in BPS and the processes that were perpetuating inequities, so that in our exam schools, it wasn't, and particularly in one exam school, it wasn't reflective of that diversity. And so I support efforts to make sure that there is equity criteria involved in our exam school admissions criteria. Ideally, we're getting to the point very quickly where this is part of the whole conversation about every single high school. But we need to be not only moving in the right direction for equity, but also making sure that everybody is part of that conversation. I think sometimes what we do in BPS and in other parts of city government is we have these conversations in just a 2-week period where families are so sometimes confused about what the changes are. We haven't given adequate time to be out in the community, really ensuring that people are thinking about what this means for their lives and how it fits with everything else. And so I want to make sure that we're constantly giving that space to move towards a governance structure where there is more room for community feedback and where we can come to consensus on these decisions in a way where we're not pitting communities against each other.
So another topic mentioned by our members and an issue is they want to hear about your approach to addressing the needs and challenges of Mass and Cass, Mass Ave and Melnia Cass Boulevard. Can you share with us your plan and why you think it would work?
I've spent a lot of time out in community, making sure that I'm walking with residents and patients and different stakeholders through the area near Melnia Cass Boulevard and Mass Ave, just to know what's happening on the ground. And when I'm there, when I see people in crisis, I see my own family. Right? There are instances where my mom has been in the depths of mental illness, self-medicating with alcohol, just this close to being on the street. I know how thin those margins are, how you're walking right on the edge sometimes. And these are our family members. These are community members that we need to make sure are protected, connected to resources. For 7 years now, the city of Boston has been talking about rebuilding a bridge that would be $100 million at least, without even talking about how to fund the buildings and supports on the other side of it. We need to move much more urgently than talking about a solution that's 4, 5, 6, 10 years away. This is a problem now, and it is a crisis that's about the overlap of mental health, substance use, and homelessness. When I talk to the providers there, the healthcare providers, people say often there's availability to get patients into treatment. But then once someone is physically healthy, if they're still not able to come back home to a safe, stable roof over their head, to be able to then think about how to get a job or get on a different pathway, it just becomes another cycle where you're falling back into the opiate crisis. And so our plan has a couple pieces to it. The foundation is supportive housing, that we need to take that $100 million that we were planning for a bridge 10 years in the future, use it now to evaluate city land, city-owned buildings, many of which are underutilized, to be able to build supportive housing and have a space and have resources for people to get off the street, to get treatment, to have that roof over their head. We also need to expand access to treatment, so it's not everything. Why am I so blurry? Sorry.
I was about to say the same thing.
So it's not just concentrated in a 1-mile radius of our city. I've already started conversations with our community health centers to understand how we can support the licensing and permitting and hoops that they jump through in order to be able to have medication-assisted treatment, right? It's a sign of how backwards things are right now in our system when any healthcare provider can prescribe opiates. But in order to prescribe treatment for opiates, you need to have a special license and approval and all these other hoops. And so working with our healthcare community to make sure that more support and treatment is available on that end. And then making sure that we are doing the outreach, moving away from criminalization of what's happening and towards public health resources and proactive outreach. The city's putting a lot of resources. We've been spending more and more, and city workers are working so hard to come through that area now and clean the streets, sweep 2-3 times a day, and to pick up needles that are reported as quickly as possible and getting that response time down. But if at the end of the day, we are still back where we started the next morning and not seeing changes and getting at the root causes, we're just spending resources spinning our wheels. And so we really need to get at root causes. For me, that's housing, more treatment, a regional plan, and making sure that we are focusing on public health and outreach.
Oh, thank you. Another topic that some of our members at Union Capital Boston have expressed concern about was public safety and what they're experiencing as a perceived rise in violence in their communities. How you approach public safety and police accountability as mayor?
Yeah, I won't pretend for a moment to know what it feels like to be Black in America, in Boston. I will share that some of the most motivating experiences for me have involved standing with my mom as the police were called on her in the midst of a an episode of delusion and mental illness, and standing in that fear of knowing what could happen if this interaction went wrong, begging for her to go to the hospital instead of the police station, and the terror of thinking about what would have happened had I not been there in that moment. And so my plan for deep reforms of the Boston Police involves shifting away from armed law enforcement in situations that's not the best response, where we need to have, whether it's for mental illness, for overdose and substance use, for homelessness, a public health-led crisis response. And I've been leading the way on that. The second is to make sure that we are demilitarizing the police, to have, whether it's tactics, weapons, interactions with community, should be building trust, not breaking it. We also need to get our resources under control. The overtime line item in the police budget has been eating away at funding that's needed for very important community stabilization, whether it's youth jobs or mental health supports or housing stability. And that continued increase in that line item is based on changes we need in the underlying contract, which the next mayor will have to negotiate. We're now a year past the police union contract expiring. And then we need accountability. There's been some big steps forward with the creation of the OPAT office, the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency. It hasn't been fully staffed up and supported yet, and so I'll make sure that that happens. But again, as we are asking of any agency, of anyone who's doing their job, when you are not fit to be in that job, when you have had a documented history of not doing your job, of misconduct, of misuse of force, there should be no question whether you are able to, whether you should be removed from that role. And so I've proposed the only plan when it comes to how to negotiate this police contract, including an objective discipline matrix for how there can be fairness and accountability, and most of all, how we ensure that we're using our resources to build community trust and to have a public health-led response rather than just armed law enforcement.
Thank you. So moving on to another topic is, throughout the country, Boston is seen as and perceived as a racist city. Just want to get your thoughts on that and how, what we can do as a city to change that reputation. Where do you think it comes from? What are your thoughts on that?
This is a part of Boston's national reputation that continues to be talked about constantly, right? We're reminded, it feels like month after month, certainly year after year, about incidents with our sports teams or experiences that visitors have in Boston. As I've been having conversations with young people in our city, if I meet someone like me who is a young person of color who wasn't originally born in this city but came here for school, everyone I talk to has had to get past that conversation that their friends and family had with them. Are you sure you want to go to Boston? Are you sure you're going to be welcome, safe, part of a community there? And the truth is that Boston is an incredibly diverse city. We're an incredibly segregated city, and we haven't confronted the scars and the racism and the structural systemic racism that has been perpetuated for decades. We've never seen a formal apology from our school committee for their role in fighting desegregation and leading to court-ordered integration of our schools, and the trauma that continues to be part of so many policy conversations because of our official government role in that. We need to be a city where we are repairing, recovering, acknowledging, and having open conversations, the tough conversations about where we've been, in order to make sure everyone is part of where we're going. We're a city of so many resources, right? We saw throughout the pandemic just what's possible in Boston when we really decide to acknowledge how interconnected all of our communities are, and when we really decide to move urgently on crises. So many of the things that happened during this pandemic were what community members have been asking for decades, but we're always told that's impossible, too expensive, too complicated, right? Making sure every child got a free laptop who was involved in our schools, making sure that any family that was going hungry could get meals provided and even delivered to where they were. This is what's possible in Boston when we start to break down those silos and feel connected to each and every community and each and every community member around our city. And so I am focused on not just making sure there's representation in government, but action to move forward on racial justice with plans that are concrete, that are bold, and that really will change and transform our systems.
Thank you. So, final mayoral pitch here. What do you want Union Capital Boston members to know about you? How will you govern this city and lead us?
I am someone who has lived how deep the gaps are for our families, and now have a decade in City Hall, knowing inside out how our city government can make a difference if we really step into our power as a city. And I say that very specifically because I know we're all running for mayor, and people are going to put that bubble next to one person's name when they go into the voting booth. But this is not about one person. This is not, Boston doesn't need a savior. This is not about who we're choosing to go into a room and make good decisions on their own. This is about who will be part of a movement, which team, which grassroots campaign will be part of a platform so that every single person can see themselves not only reflected and represented, but empowered to be part of shaping our future together. And so more than anything else, I am for shifting what's possible in our city, believing that we can do more when everyone is at the table. And we've already seen that happen. I'm proud that so many of the pushes we've taken on, from fighting for free public transportation several years ago, being laughed at when it was first proposed, to now just recently seeing the first free bus line announced in Boston after all of our organizing, to pushing for Boston to do more and lead the way when it comes to climate justice and how our air quality and housing and transportation are all connected to the future that our kids and grandkids will have. I'm living the stakes just like families all across our city, but most of all, I want us to push for that vision for our future that includes everyone, and that will make sure that everyone is part of this vision for a thriving, resilient, prosperous city where we're all connected.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today, Boston City Councilor Michelle Wu, City Councilor at Large, candidate for Boston Mayor. This is UCB-TV, your place to touch base with the community. candidate conversations. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you on the next one.
Thanks for having me.